4, so I say almost 5:05. Let's just get going. Before diving into things, Zach, Lon, Isabel, thank you so much for being here and talking to not only the Founder Fellows, which we'll talk a little bit more, but also being open to sort of opening this up to the broader public. I think for you guys will all do introductions. It's better than me sort of trying to talk through everything. But for people who don't know, we have an all-star panel of healthcare entrepreneurs here. I'm super excited. I spend the majority of my time looking at healthcare. So selfishly, just getting to spend, an hour with all of you is exciting for me. And we're really excited to hear more about the early days of your companies, hear about what you've learned along the way, and learn more about where you're focusing your time and energy currently. This conversation, just sort of like for people to level set, will be about 60 minutes. The first 40 minutes is going to be open to everyone. And then the last 20 minutes is going to be closed off and just for the primary fellows. For people who don't know, Primary runs a fellowship, which is a 6-month experience, which helps early stage founders in New York build and launch startups. So without much further ado, let's kick things off. And Isabel, would love to hear a little bit, the sort of 2 to 3 minute background on yourself, and then we can go around the horn.
Cool. I'm Isabel. I started my career in investment banking in Asia. I moved over to the e-commerce startup side of things, and then I broke my back and pelvis skiing, became obsessed with the healthcare system and digitizing it. Felt like one big retail business that should be an e-commerce business, which is a way oversimplified statement 6 years later. But I joined the early team at Capsule and was there for about 3.5 years, building out different parts of the business, and then left about a year and a half, 2 years ago to start building out Calibrate. Calibrate is a virtual metabolic health business. So our first product is a 1-year program that helps you reset your metabolic system, lose 10% or more of your body weight, and combines intensive lifestyle intervention with medication.
Awesome. Zach?
Sure. Zach Weinberg. I'm kind of a retired entrepreneur temporarily, I guess. I started first in ad tech with a company called Invite Media that we sold to Google, had a similar why am I doing this kind of moment. I should work in something more interesting and meaningful, and decided to get into healthcare back in 2012, specifically in oncology. Started a company called Flatiron Health in 2012 that we sold to Roche in 2018. And left Roche in the beginning of this year, actually. So now kind of off unemployed officially, and mostly spending time doing early stage investing, both in healthcare and non in healthcare. I'd say healthcare ends up being probably like 35% or so of what we do. We pooled money with a few other operators and started a group called Operator Partners that does kind of seed, Series A, and even some Series B investing in companies across the country. So that's my job.
Awesome. And to wrap it up, Alon.
Hi, Alon. I'm co-founder and CEO of K-Health. Originally from Israel, been in the States for the last 15 years or so. I was co-CEO of Wix, which is public on NASDAQ, and co-founder and CEO of Roam, which is also on NASDAQ, and started K about 4.5 years ago, essentially around, actually we had no clue what we were doing, but essentially it was around a belief that we can teach a machine the language of medicine, and we can use technology and data in a very different way in medicine. Actually don't think about so much about healthcare. Healthcare is a business that we operate in, but we spend a lot of time thinking about medicine, and we can talk about what we're building, but fundamentally we're building primary care online, and a full-blown way for people to manage their acute conditions, chronic conditions, and of course, preventing chronic conditions online. We've raised about $400 million to date. We employ probably 700 people collectively, so no longer small, but yeah, we'll talk about all of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we'll go into all of your stories a little bit deeper. I think it's really interesting. I know when I was, refreshing myself on all of your backgrounds, none of you guys came from a traditional healthcare background to start. I think, Isabel, you probably spent the most time in healthcare at Capsule before Calibrate. Would love to hear more about how your non-healthcare backgrounds have sort of helped you guys exceed. It's such a complicated and regulated industry. How has it helped you? How has it made things difficult?
Way to kick it off. I mean, I think we explained it best and often at Capsule as an iceberg, where the consumer sees like the part above the surface and it seems totally messed up, but there's all this humongous stuff below the surface that's the reason why it's messed up. And so at Capsule, it's like you go to the pharmacy and the thing's out of stock and you're like, how could a thing be out of stock? Like, I don't understand. Like, there aren't other industries where I go to the store and the thing's out of stock unless there's a global pandemic and a global supply chain shortage, but that's different. And everything below the surface makes sense for why it's out of stock, right? Like the incentives between the pharmacy and the wholesaler for what should be stocked and what shouldn't be stocked, the reimbursements for what's between the pharmacy and the PBMs for what's reimbursed and how it's reimbursed. Like it all starts to make sense when you understand it. And so I always just tell people new to healthcare, like follow the money, like follow the funds. And that's why I think so interesting that there's this crop of like direct to consumer cash pay startups because they don't follow the money, right? Like they just ignore the money. And I think that's really interesting. And that's definitely one approach. But another approach I think is really interesting is to just understand like who makes money where and how can you align incentives for people in healthcare. And that was kind of my biggest takeaway from Capsule, that you can only really win if you're aligning incentives for lots of stakeholders. Otherwise, someone will shut you down because they're all like Fortune 50 companies.
Yeah. How did you start going about learning about that though? We have a bunch of fellows here.
So much reading and talking, like, you know, like asking people for time, asking people to talk. Like, I think you just have to ask questions and you just have to say like, I'm new to healthcare. You got to explain it to me, like as if I don't get it, because I don't get it. But just talking to lots of people and reading lots of things, like there's so much amazing, there are so many like deep, weird corners of healthcare. And every single one of them has a blog. And like you got to go find the blog for your deep weird corner and read about it. And like Reddit, and there's some other thing like Reddit called like T forum or something. I forgot what it's called. I'll think of it later in this conversation. But like you got to just read, deep reading.
There are a lot of weird corners for sure.
Cafe Pharma was specifically for pharmacies.
Alon, what about you? Building websites, selling cars online, to healthcare, you know, sort of taking over the world of primary care?
I think it's a big advantage not coming from the industry, because the industry is regulated, but it's mostly constrained. There is so many layers of, you know, as Isabel said, there is this whole who pays who for what, which is totally not trivial. Just figuring that out by asking a bunch of questions, a lot of different people, is not trivial. And oftentimes, if you're an insider, if you're born to that industry and you're working there for decades, you don't stop and say, why does it work this way? Why does it not follow an economic model? Most things in healthcare don't follow the intuitive economic model of supply and demand or price elasticity for various reasons, partially because of medicine and partially because, you know, the structure you know, of the way that works. So for me, I mean, maybe similar to Elizabeth, I just kind of found a bunch of people that I can ask my questions. And some of my questions were pretty basic. Why do you need a doctor? What does a doctor do? Why are they regulated to do this? Can a nurse do this? Can a machine do this? Why is it so complicated to do this? Because part of it is demystifying medicine. You're talking about a profession that's, you know, the Johns Hopkins approach to medicine is 1870s, and it was magical and groundbreaking then. And you've got the Framingham study in the 1950s. But a lot of medicine hasn't changed in over half a century. A lot of it, most of it. And drugs have changed, but the care delivery hasn't. And trying to understand how it works, and trying to get to the root cause of who's making the decisions about all these different things is not trivial. And you're going to go down a lot of blind alleys and what did you call it, Elizabeth? A lot of kind of interesting and quirky corners of healthcare. You said it better than me. but it was like, why does this work that way? And who are these people that are, have this massive industry that nobody's ever heard of, but it's part of healthcare. Look, we also have two big partnerships with Anthem. We have a big joint venture with Anthem and Blackstone, focusing on the employer market. We have a partnership with Mayo. So we did speak to people who, have a ton of experience, but even they don't know all the answers to everything, but of course they know a lot. So a lot of it is just triangulation. I think it's a big plus not coming from the industry.
Yeah.
Because you're going to ask yourself, you're going to take lessons from other industries.
Mm-hmm. Zach, did you do that when you started Flatiron too? Do you feel similar? I mean, ad tech, right? And then you come in and someone started an oncology business. Not too close.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it from the surface.
No, I think both are totally spot on. I agree. There's an advantage being from the outside, and you find a set of people who actually know what they're talking about, and you focus on asking them all the questions. And it's like a subset of the people who think they know what they're talking about. So, you start with this many people who are supposedly experts, and then you realize like 80% of them actually don't really know anything. They've just kind of memorized what someone else told them, but can't actually explain it. And a subset of those people can, and those are the ones you spend your time with. You have to like it though. That's the only thing. Like, you have to really want to understand this stuff. You have to like the complexity, because you have to keep digging. And if you don't keep digging, you're going to get to a point where you're like, you think you know how something works. It doesn't really work that way. So you have to like really, really want to do it. I think some people are in healthcare because they think they're supposed to want to be in healthcare, but they don't really care enough. Like, they don't really want to understand the details. So you have to like sit and, read the random Reddit thread and find the blog and find the like odd expert. And if you don't do that, it's just not going to work. The other nice thing about not being in healthcare is you can talk to someone and be like, I have no idea what that means, and kind of like not look like an idiot, because you're not supposed to know what it means. I think a lot of people spend, 5-10 years in healthcare, and at a certain point, they're like, now they're an insider. And so it's hard for them to be like, what does that word mean? Because they don't want to look stupid. But when you're first starting out, it doesn't matter. So I agree that coming from the outside, but you do have to learn it. You do have to want to be there.
The GoodRx founders do such a good job of this. They're still like, their company's worth like $20 billion. And they're still like, we're new to healthcare. We're like Facebook guys. Can you help us understand like the flow of funds here? Like, you just got to be super humble and like really ask questions all the time.
Yeah.
It's not a good fake it till you make it industry.
The acronyms alone will overwhelm you. People come in there and SINs and IPAs and all these types of things. Are you talking about beer suddenly? So it can be very confusing. Zach, I'm curious, early on, what are some like the mistakes that you remember that you made, and if you were going back, you'd think about doing differently?
I mean, we were in like a really niche part of healthcare and oncology, and then in like real world data and oncology. So it's nuanced to this. I wouldn't say it's necessarily more broadly, but for us, it was not hiring physicians early enough. Just like not having the deep clinical expertise in oncology that we needed for our business to succeed, because we were so focused in this one area. And we thought in the beginning, maybe we could get away with like some full-time nurses and then oncologists as outside experts. And it just doesn't work. If you're like in a specific area, you really need the person, sitting next to you who is a 20-year vet of that particular domain. And we just, it's expensive. It's hard to recruit them. They don't communicate particularly well. And so it's annoying. And then if you just don't want to do it, and we definitely like shot ourselves in the foot by waiting. So for sure that in the beginning, and then we had this like super odd struggle of like, are we a healthcare company? Are we a tech company? And like the healthcare people didn't want the tech people to be in charge. The tech people didn't want the healthcare people in charge. I felt like my entire job was trying to get adults to be nice to each other. And at some point we just kind of said, it's both. That's it. It's both. Like, we have to be both companies for us to succeed in our market. And as a result, like, you have to learn to work with each other. You have to respect the other discipline. And it is a technology company in oncology. And that means we have to be experts in both. Other companies can get away with saying it's a tech company first that operates in healthcare. We were not able to do that because of the complexity of our domain. But those were far and away the two hardest, I think, for us.
Isabel, I saw you shaking your head in agreement around the hiring physicians. That's something you guys did early, or was that something you said?
I had the agreement that they're expensive and it's really hard to justify early, but our first hire was actually our chief medical officer. And I feel like we did the opposite. We waited too long to hire like really great product and engineering talent. We had like individual contributors, but we didn't have like product and tech leaders early enough. And it's a really hard balance. We were, you have really limited resources early days, and so you have to pick. And we wanted the product to work. We wanted the clinical pathways to work. And so we hired amazing clinicians and worked with them, and they're really expensive. And we built out an awesome clinical pathway, but it was literally on duct tape. And as soon as the product took off and we were onboarding hundreds and thousands of people a month, everything broke. And so then the second mistake was that we spent 10 months building our own app for consumers. We were using like a white labeled version of someone else's app until that point. And we got a lot of consumer input along the way. But I think we really underestimated how much people hate change in healthcare and how vulnerable it makes them feel. And so the day we swapped the new app out was probably the worst day of Calibrate for me so far. And the week after, like, I just didn't sleep. Like, I spoke to members who were sobbing and they were like, I had it all figured out and now I feel out of control. And I'm like, it's all still there. There's actually more things you can do there. But they just like, it's, consumers are super vulnerable in healthcare. And when you make changes and you make big changes, it does not go over well. And so I think we thought it was going to be like such a win that we were rolling out an app that did everything the old app did plus a lot more. And they felt totally lost and confused. And it was a massive, massive mistake.
So you would have hired, help around that, you would have hired more product and engineering people earlier. Zach would have hired.
You have to pick, right? Like startups are about trade-offs and leverage points, right? And so you got to pick. And for us, it was clinicians first and then product and eng, but you're always in debt then, like you didn't have the early product and eng leaders architecting what you needed, or vice versa, where Zach's trying to convince his team that they need to have like amazing clinicians to have a seat at the table later. Like you got to pick, but it's hard. And I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer. And I bet it's pretty business dependent.
Yeah, we did the other route. Too many product and tech people.
Hold on. What about you, Ray K? Did you solve this early on, or did you face a similar problem?
Look, I think I don't think you ever solve it. I think you're evolving. Look, when you're hiring doctors, if you're not a physician, and I am not, it takes time to adjust, to understand, how they think. There's, of course, different physicians who do different things. We have physicians who work on our service. We have physicians who work on our product. So these are two different skill sets. I think if you bring, as Zach was saying, are we healthcare or are we tech? Within tech, we have data, we have mathematicians, we have software engineers. They don't necessarily all look at the world, in the same way. You have people working on funnels and product. Bringing all these people to the room and to a room and trying to agree on a problem you're trying to solve, and solving to that problem and dealing with all the complexity of doing that is just really tough. So you need, well, I think probably we underestimated how long it's going to take to build it. Our users are our end users, but our users are also doctors, because we have doctors that talk to our patients. And that entire process is really complicated. You're talking about people's lives. You're talking about very important stuff. ROI is lifespan. It's happiness. It's super basic stuff. And so you need to be kind of humble is an understatement. You need to expect that this is going to take time, and it's multidisciplinary, and building all these different things. So mistakes on hiring, to me, I don't know if I should have hired more product or more doctors, but getting the right people. We switched quite a lot of people along the way at the kind of director, team lead level, both on the tech and the medical, because you need to get doctors to understand what we're all about. And I'm looking at some of the big, at least the trade media in healthcare is obsessed with the big tech companies that are coming into healthcare, and they made some recent big announcements that they're closing down at least some of them are closing down their investments. And what it looks to me is they brought people from very traditional doctors. And it's not, you need to come with a hunger to change things in medicine. You need to believe that the healthcare currently in America isn't working. It doesn't work, not only because it's too expensive or could be 10% better. It needs to be built from the ground up. So you need to find people that buy into the mission, not as a slogan, but really want to change things. You know, as Zach mentioned, you really need to really understand what you're talking about, but then also need to soul search and figure out how to get it right. Hiring those kind of people for any kind of company stuff, doing it in healthcare and medicine is just going to be tougher. So you'll bring people in, they may or may not be the right fit. You evolve over time. Getting a team, when we have a team that has a data scientist, a doctor, a product person, a software engineer, and funnel all come together and all can actually work together, that's magical. It takes time to get there. A lot. It takes longer than, oh, I brought them in, they're all experienced, it's going to work. So I think those, you know, just taking more time and just more tweaks around the product and, you know, how we tell our story to our users, but also to doctors. So sorry, but it's complicated. I just think it's a lot of fun. So I don't look at it and say, wow, it's complicated. It's just, it's enjoyable. You're solving massive problems globally. But you need to have the right mix of people here. That doesn't change in any company. It doesn't matter what business you're in, but here it's you know, there's just more disciplines.
Zach, I feel like early, 2012, the New York City healthcare scene was not what it is today. Like there's, you know, lots of unicorns now in New York. They're focused on healthcare. Like, what did recruiting look like for you in 2012? How did you convince people in a world where like recruiting is brutal in general right now and finding people, but it's easier to find great healthcare people today in New York than it was 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we were first or in that first cohort, to be honest, in the sense that once we convinced somebody that healthcare was the place for them, if they didn't come from the industry or they were coming from healthcare and didn't understand about being in a software oriented company, we were almost always the top choice or top two, because there just wasn't a lot of competition. And so like our close rates were very high. I mean, our engineering close rates were kind of pushing 80%. And we used to track that. And I'm sure now if we were to do it again, it would be half that at best. Because there's just not as many companies. There weren't as many companies when we started. On the flip side, finding seasoned mid-level directors and VPs was like next to impossible, because you had to find a skill set in healthcare and that was actually at like a well-run company, and there were not a lot of those at the time. And so we ended up having to do a lot more like internal training for people. We hired a lot out of consulting because we needed people who had professional experience and knew how to lead small teams and, you know, just a good work ethic and work structure. Like they could write an email and follow up and build, you know, little basics that like you kind of don't learn in a bunch of other industries. And then we had to teach them the healthcare stuff. So I'm glad we were first. There's way more competition today. On the flip side, I think because there's more companies, we will see some outcomes that are much bigger than Flatiron for sure. Because you can build a bigger business just with like a better team, you know, and there's now just more people out there who you can rely on. So I expect we had a big outcome for the time, but I think in the grand scheme of things, they'll end up being smaller than many of them for sure.
Isabel, how is recruiting for you these days?
I always say, I had to talk to Nat, Zach's co-founder, about this, but when I was at Capsule, you could basically only recruit out of Flatiron and Oscar. They were the only other health tech companies in New York. And you couldn't because they were curing cancer and building the first insurance tech company ever or whatever else, you know, like healthcare is so mission driven for people that once people are on your team, I think it's, you know, they're incredibly passionate. And so unless they hate something about like the way that you work, which you learn really quickly and people leave really fast in those situations, I think it's actually the biggest advantage of all time. Like people are impacted by health. Everyone is, right? Everyone has a family member who's had a bad healthcare delivery story. And so I think the mission driven part makes it really easy. What I actually say is the challenge now is people are so obsessed with your mission and so excited and passionate about what you do that it becomes hard to figure out if they'll actually be successful on your team, because they're selling you so hard that like they're like obsessed with the mission, that they want to work all day every day on it, that they like really really want to get involved. They'll take any role, they just want to be on the rocket ship, whatever. And it is a rocket ship across digital health, not specific to my business at all, but like, you know, people are begging to work for you and you're like, I have no idea, I need to like vet you. Like I have no idea if you're going to be any good or not. And I think you know, like it's a shifting market, and like last year was impossible to hire. There was no certainty around kids in schools. There was like no one wanted to leave a big company, no one wanted to leave a secure company and go early stage. Like now we've announced a big Series B, it's a lot easier. Like these things go in waves, and at different points there's different, you know, you're attracting different profiles of talent. But I would say that this year feels fundamentally different than last year, and that it's a lot easier this year, almost too easy, which makes me like really nervous.
How do you think about leading a fully remote team? I think I saw a quote where from you about needing to dial up your empathy. Like, how has that changed over the last couple of years? And you've built an entirely remote team. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, like I think as a first-time CEO, you just realize that like you've been sitting in the non-CEO seat being like, why isn't this person holding that person more accountable? Like, why isn't the CEO holding that person more accountable? And then when you are the CEO, you're like, yeah, because there's like a lot of stuff going on in people's lives, and you have to exhibit like a large amount of empathy for people, right? And I think I was always the person when I was the number 2 holding people accountable. And then all of a sudden you're the number 1 and you're like, oh, this is really hard. Like you have to like really dial up the empathy. And when people's kids aren't in school and they're teaching them math, like at the like table next to where they're trying to get on Zoom, like that's really, really hard. And so if they can't make meetings for 4 hours in the middle of the day, like you get it. Like you're grateful that they're going to work the other 4 hours of the day. And so I think for me, that was the biggest lesson, but it also is just like a first time CEO lesson, I think. And I think, I don't know the other way, like this team has been built entirely remotely. And so right before we started, Alon was talking about how he wants to be back in the office and he knows his team is X% more productive. Like, I don't know what that is for my team, and my team's been pretty productive remote, but it might be 100 times better or 1150 times better, whatever he said, if we could be together. I don't know. So
yeah.
Just, you don't know what you don't know.
Alon, how do you think about leading? I mean, this is your 3rd shot as CEO of a very large business. How has your style changed over the years?
I think you get older, you get more mature, you get more life experience. If you have kids, you also see those type, you have new relationships in your life. So I think the goal is to continue to learn all the time in terms of how you're impacting people. If you're the CEO and you're hiring somebody and they're excited and they're, you know, committed to be part of it, there's always a delicate balance between empowering people and also just making sure you understand, you know, what they're doing and they're aligned. And I think it's become, I mean, Zach mentioned order of magnitude or much bigger outcomes, even compared to Flatiron. The potential here is in healthcare and in medicine is to build significant businesses globally. So, you know, how do you manage the team? The playbook has changed a lot. COVID is one aspect, but also societal changes, also expectations of people. You know, we have a large team in Tel Aviv. We have a large team in New York. We now have also an engineering team in Kiev in Ukraine. So all of a sudden, you know, we're global, yet there's also pockets of local. Every location does work a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's just more complicated to manage it. But even if you look at roles such as kind of chief people or VP people, those roles have changed a lot the last 5-6 years. Nobody calls it kind of VPHR, you know, it changes a lot. the importance of the role changed, the way you think about the organization, the way you solicit feedback. So I'm changing, the world's changing, employees' expectations are changing. And, you know, the example Isabel gave, like 5 years ago, if somebody said, okay, you know, my employee is disappearing for hours in the middle of the day because they've got something personal to deal with, you'd say, okay, that doesn't make sense for me. Now you need to figure out how it does make sense for you, you know, and how to embrace it. So it's quite dramatic. I think we're still in the early innings of understanding all of this. And, you know, I don't know exactly how it all ends up playing out. You know, what I said earlier, just before we started, was my 1,500% increase in productivity when people are in person. There are certain things that we're just as humans are much better doing in person. Debating, brainstorming, discussing, socializing. It's not the same doing, having a drink on Zoom. It's just not the same. There was a novelty factor in March last year. It's just not the same. And your eyes hurt in Zoom. So I do think that kind of 3 days a week is, you know, that kind of stuff is going to, you know, matter a lot for a big chunk of my company. Maybe 5 days a week will never happen again. I don't know. So all these things are just big questions on top of everything else of our business and strategy and everything else that you need to figure out. The job of the CEO is tougher, you know, Isabel's saying, you know, first time CEO, I think it doesn't matter how many years, it's just going to be, it's really, really tough. And it's changed dramatically. I think the biggest thing, maybe just to go back to your core question, is I expect to have fewer answers for the questions that people ask me. I don't, and I'm comfortable with that. I don't have the answers to all these different things.
Yeah. Yeah, and being okay with that at the end of the day is a sign of maturity. And you've been there before, and you don't have to know all the answers.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with not knowing, and I'm comfortable that we'll figure it out over time.
If we go back to the early days, was there a moment where you say, I feel like we found product market fit? You know, we have a lot of people on this call who are starting businesses, maybe the businesses are a couple months old, and searching for that. Was there one moment for you guys where you said, yep, this is it. I know how to grow and I know what to do? Or was it just really a series of a bunch of different little things?
We had a single moment. I think it's kind of odd for that to happen, but we had actually, interestingly enough, we won an RFP from Roche, from Genentech, to be a core data vendor for what they were looking to do. And they sent that RFP out to like every major data company you could think of in the US and actually internationally too. And we won it. And at that point, I think we knew like, all right, this is gonna work. Couldn't tell you the scale that was gonna work at. I couldn't tell you how big it could be, but there was definitely like a big hunting moment for us. I think that happens a little more so in healthcare than in other industries, because there are a bunch of like very, very big enterprise deals that you can win that do put you on the map. And K Health obviously is a really big one as well. That was it for us at least.
I envy you, Zach.
Hey, you had a big payer deal early on. That was a huge. Yeah. I remember that. That was a big deal.
But it's all, to me, it's a series of wins. Look, in retrospect, we launched our app for free. We had no business model or even no understanding of what our business model will be. And we initially launched it in Israel because we had an HMO partner there that we licensed the data, and it became the top free app in Israel across everything, not across medicine. It beat Instagram, it beat WhatsApp. This was before TikTok. This was in 2018. This was a big aha moment of really people want to get health information and want to understand it. I didn't realize at the time how groundbreaking it was because I just didn't know. Mm-hmm. I was still used to doctors making fun of me. Like, you'd go and present, it's like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not even a doctor. You're barking up, all the wrong places. So I didn't have the confidence that it was, just how big it's going to be. So I didn't have that aha moment that Zach had then. I had a series of aha moments around our capabilities, along the way, but then you feel good for a moment, and then you've got, okay, and now I need to figure out how to get paid, or I need to figure out how this is going to work, or it's, so so I look at it as a series of things. In terms of what this industry is so big. There's so many things to do that you need to pace yourself.
I'll echo that. I think on the enterprise side, and we said this when we raised our Series B, we got to make a bunch of big bets and we got to see what works, and we have no idea. And so I think we're like really early innings and we don't know. On the direct to consumer side, I think I wouldn't say we got lucky, but I would say that the category is so fundamentally broken and consumers are so tired of things that don't work that truly within hours of launching the website, we had emailed friends and family and we had turned on Google ads. And this woman in upstate New York spent 3 minutes on the website, took out a $1,500 loan and paid us for a 1-year program that didn't have a Google review against it. And that's when we were like, okay, same as Zach, like no idea how big this market is, but there's a market of people who will just pay you for this directly, without reviews, without testimonials, without stories, without evidence, without proof. This market is so big and so broken that there are people who will just pay you. And so I think on the direct to consumer side, we got conviction really early that those channels were going to scale. And on the enterprise side, I have no idea. And if anyone on this call wants to help me figure it out, ping me after. But we're really early on the enterprise side.
Awesome. So we're at 5:40 right now. So going to shift over to a little bit more Q&A on the founder fellowship side for primary. Thank you for everyone else who did join during this conversation, and looking forward to diving into some other questions from some people who are in the thick of starting a business right now.